Hey team, welcome back to my channel. The source code to this video is available on my GitHub account. Go to github.com, look for softwareNuggets, then look for the repository called SQL Server Examples. Kind of scroll to the bottom until you see a file called salted_password.sql, and that's the file. And here's the source code for this video. You got it. Here you can plainly see that plain text is dangerous. The only way to actually put a password in the database is to secure it. Storing your password in plain text is not advisable. As you can see, 1 in 5 people are part of data breaches inside your company. Now the bad guy has your username and password. They try to access other accounts because they know most people do not change their username and passwords. A better way to store your passwords is to salt them and then run them through a hash function. And then here's our table, site user M. Notice an ID, it's an integer, also my primary key, and it's an identity column. Notice I'm going to begin with a little over 1 million and I'm going to increment by 37. Then I have your login name, that's kind of like an email address. And then we have the password salt. Now by default, the new ID function will produce a value. That's what's going to go into the salt. We will use the user's password and the password salt to generate the password hash, the date that this person became a member. Let's go ahead and create this table. Let's dive into SFN hash password. This is a scalar function. That means just one column will be returned. Notice that we have 2 input parameters, a password and a salt. Begin and end, notice I'm declaring 2 new variables. On line 13, I'm going to concatenate the password and the salt together. But the first thing I must do is I must convert this unique identifier into varchar 36. Then use the concat, put those 2 together, and we build pwd and salt. Then pwd and salt becomes input to the function HashBytes. Now notice I'll be using SHA-2 512. Now all this does is it generates a 512-bit hash. And then now we have it as a string. It is in hash password, and then we're going to return that value. Just so you won't have any questions about the function HashBytes, let me explain that. Now this function has 2 input parameters. The first one is telling HashBytes generate a 512-bit hash. And the second parameter, that is my input that we'll be using. This is the password and the salt. Together, these should make a unique pattern. Well, not should, it will create a unique pattern. So when we execute this function, execute, notice the output starts with 0x, that means hexadecimal. But I want to store this in a database as a string. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say convert varchar 128, and then I'm going to be pointing at the return value of this function, and I'm going to say, make that look like a string. So when I execute that, notice that 0x is gone, and we still have all of our hex values as the results. Let's dive into the procedure proc register user. Notice it takes 2 input parameters, a login name and a password. On line 6, we're going to build the salt. Notice that's of type unique identifier. We compute this value using the function newID. On line 8, we're going to build the insert clause. So insert into table. Here are the fields that we will use. Notice that we're using an input parameter login name, a salt from newID, and then we're going to call the function SFN hash password. We're going to pass in password and salt. Notice down here below is the value from this function that will go to password hash. And this is all there is to this procedure. Let's take a look at SFN validate user. Notice this is a 2 input parameters, login name and user password. And this function, scalar, just returns a bit. Now let's look at the code between begin and end. First, we're declaring 3 variables. All variables must begin with the @ symbol. And you can see here, stored hash is a varchar 128. Password salt is a unique identifier, and is valid is a bit field, default value to false. Then we are going to do a select command. So select from site user M where login equals the login name from the input parameters. Then here we're actually going to do an assignment from this column into this variable, and then from this column into this variable. So this is how we can assign values from a table to variables. Now if we find that login name, these will be stored. And then we can come down and say select is valid, and you can see here we have a case statement. Now case when at stored hash, notice we got that from the table. And now what we're going to do is we're going to compute another hash, and we're going to send in the user password and the salt that we got from the table, and this will generate another hash. And then I'm going to compare these two hashes, and if they're equal, I'm going to return 1, which is true. Else, I'm going to return 0, which is false. And then notice add is valid is what gets returned to the caller of this. So I have two examples down here. Notice here I say select case, I'm going to call that validator, and notice here's my username and here's my password. Well, we know this got stored, and this right here should return true. Let me move up the results here so you can see that, and let's re-execute this. Execute, and notice true. So when I select from here, you can see all the data. Now, if I come up here and change the password, notice I turn the L into an E, this no longer is true. This should return false or 0. And there you have it, team. Now, if you have any questions or comments about this video, please leave them below in the comments section. If you think this video deserves a thumbs up, would appreciate that as well. And that's all I have, team. Until the next time, take care.